April 12th, 1937, Krupp Steelworks, Essen, Germany. The air inside Hall 4 hung thick with coal dust and the nose-stinging smell of hot metal. Hammering echoed from every direction, giant steam forges and smaller pneumatic hammers beating their relentless rhythm into the walls, the floor, and the bones of every worker privileged enough to labour inside the beating industrial heart of the Reich. Sparks flew like molten insects as workers guided glowing steel ingots beneath hydraulic presses. The building roared like a living beast, feeding on iron, sweat, and national ambition. In an office overlooking the controlled chaos of the foundry floor, Dr. Ernst Keller, senior metallurgist for Friedrich Krupp AG, pressed his fingertips into his forehead. Papers covered the desk. Heat treatment logs, quench diagrams, furnace temperature readings, and microhardness measurements. But his eyes kept returning to one particular sheet, thin, yellowish, with handwritten notes in an elegant, almost obsessive script. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. This note, the note he had written at 3:17 a.m. after 2 nights without sleep, a note he originally intended to file away and forget. Instead, it would eventually silence over 500 German tank cannons before they ever fired a shot in anger. But Keller didn't know that yet. No one did. For now, there was only the gnawing unease of an engineer who had discovered something terrifyingly simple yet potentially catastrophic. The note contained 4 words, scrawled at the top: hardness variance too high. Beneath those words were diagrams and microhardness values collected from test batches of L52 grade steel, the alloy used for the gun tubes of Germany's rapidly developing tank fleet, Panzer III, Panzer IV, and prototypes that would later evolve into the Tiger program. The numbers didn't lie. Something was wrong. Gun steel needed a precise balance between hardness and elasticity. Too soft, and the barrel would warp under firing pressure. Too hard, and microscopic cracks would spiderweb inside the chamber until the entire tube failed catastrophically, often on the very first shot. Over the last 4 months, Keller had seen enough variance to unsettle him. He flipped through the logbook again. Batch 9, A, acceptable. Batch 9B, borderline. Batch 9, C, dangerously brittle. Batch 10, A, normal. Batch 10, B, brittle. Batch 11, A, brittle. Batch 11, B, brittle. It wasn't a trend, it was a crisis. If these numbers represented the material going into cannon production, hundreds of barrels would have identical internal flaws. Most would never be detected visually, most would pass factory inspection, and most would fail the moment a tank crew chambered its first shell. Keller stood and moved to the window. Below him, workers in heavy aprons dragged still glowing billets toward the machining bays. These were the best industrial workers in Europe, disciplined, experienced, and working at speeds the Reich demanded as it rearmed in open violation of the Treaty of Versailles. But no amount of discipline could overcome bad steel. A worker below glanced up and noticed Keller watching. The man gave a weary, respectful nod. Keller returned it mechanically at first, then with a sudden pang of guilt. These men trusted the engineers to get the formulas right. A flaw in the alloy wasn't only a matter of production, it was a matter of life, death, and national strategy. He returned to his desk, grabbed the note again, and stared at the circled phrase in the margin. Suspect molybdenum supply? The line of scribbled question marks after it captured exactly how much Keller did not want that suspicion to be true, because that would mean the entire supply chain was compromised, and that meant disaster. A heavy knock jolted Keller from his thoughts. The door opened before he answered. Director Werner Volk, his superior, entered with the brisk confidence of a man who believed problems were solved by shouting at them until they retreated. His uniform-style industrial coat was spotless. He never went near the furnaces if he could help it. "Keller," Volk barked, "the Panzer Commission wants the updated barrel certification numbers this afternoon. They are increasing demands again, another 70 barrels this month for the armoured units. Everything ready?" Keller hesitated. That was enough for Falk's left eyebrow to twitch. "What is it now?" he sighed. Keller swallowed, realizing he could not soften the blow. "I've identified a pattern of brittleness in the last 5 production batches. 22% of the tubes are outside safe hardness range. If this continues—" "The military inspectors passed them," Falk interrupted. "The tubes went through magnetic testing. We found no cracks." "That's the problem," Keller said. "Magnetic flux testing won't detect what I'm seeing. These flaws are internal, subsurface. They will only appear under firing pressure. If they appear at all." Keller took a breath. "Sir, they will. The steel structure is wrong. The carbon dispersion is inconsistent. It's as if the alloy mix changed without anyone adjusting the process." Falk's eyes narrowed. "Are you accusing the workers of negligence?" "No. The formula changed higher up. Either the wrong grade of molybdenum was delivered, or the supply was contaminated." Falk waved a hand dismissively. "Impossible. Our suppliers are certified." Keller pointed to the note. "And yet the hardness variance proves something is wrong. And if I report this to Berlin, do you know what happens? Production halts. Tanks already behind schedule fall further behind. The army wants 900 barrels by year's end." "With this steel," Keller said, "they'll be lucky if 400 don't explode." The director stopped pacing. "Keller, you are asking me to tell the War Office that Krupp, Germany's greatest industrial asset, is producing unreliable steel for its tanks. Do you want me dismissed? Do you want half this facility purged?" "It isn't about people," Keller said quietly. "It's about physics. The molecules don't care about politics." Falk leaned across the desk. "Well, politics cares about everything." A long silence hung between them. Finally, Keller slid the note forward. "I don't need to escalate it beyond technical review," he said. "All I request is a temporary hold on new barrel production until composition tests confirm if the alloy is compromised. A week at most." Falk stared at the sheet, as if hoping it would spontaneously combust. "How many barrels are affected?" "Possibly. All of them manufactured since February." Falk snatched the paper. "That's almost 500 barrels." "Yes. Then we say nothing." Keller stiffened. "Sir," Falk raised a finger. "Listen to me. We meet quotas. The army gets its tanks. If a few tubes fail at the training grounds, we replace them quietly. But we will not halt production during rearmament. That decision is final." He walked to the door. For a moment, Keller thought that was the end. Then Falk paused, turned back, and lowered his voice. "I'll file your concern as a minor variance and request a review. But I will not mention widespread brittleness. Understood?" The door closed. Keller stared at the empty space where his director had stood, and he realized he had just been ordered to bury the truth. Late that night, the foundry had calmed. Most workers went home. Only night shift machinists remained, finishing calibration on the massive horizontal boring machines that shaped raw tubes into precision gun barrels. Keller couldn't sleep. His conscience wouldn't allow it. He walked the length of the foundry floor, each footstep echoing back from the towering walls. The dull glow of furnaces provided the only illumination. Inside a machining bay, Herr Rolf Brenner, a veteran worker with scarred hands and steel-grey hair, was finishing his shift. Brenner had worked here since before the Great War. He nodded respectfully. "Long night, Herr Doctor?" "Too long." Keller sighed. Brenner tapped a freshly bored gun tube. "We finished 20 more tonight. Fine pieces of work." Keller touched the cold steel. "Have there been incidents during pressure tests?" Brenner paused, surprised by the question. "A few popped early. Cracks in the chamber. We assumed over-hardening." "How many?" 5? Maybe 6. Strange thing is, the steel feels right, sounds right when it rings." He tapped again with a wrench. The tone echoed clean and metallic. "But something's wrong inside. You can feel it." Keller exhaled shakily. Brenner's instincts confirmed everything. "The steel is too brittle," Keller said quietly. Brenner frowned deeply. Then why does production continue? Because of politics, because of fear, because a single note from a metallurgist could derail the Reich's armoured program. Because, Keller said at last, the army needs barrels. Brenner placed the wrench down with slow deliberation. And the boys who fire them? What do they need? A coffin? That struck Keller harder than he expected. Back at his office, Keller sat before the note, the same note Falk had insisted be buried. He thought of the tank crews who would trust these guns with their lives. Young men, sons, brothers, students, farmers, workers. Men whose only mistake would be believing their country gave them safe equipment. He reached for his pen. He flipped the note over. He wrote one new sentence. Recommend immediate halt of L-52 barrel production, pending full chemical analysis. His hand shook as he signed it. Ernst Keller, Senior Metallurgist, Krupp AG, Essen, the 12th of April, 1937. He placed the note inside an envelope stamped Technical Hazard Priority, and then he did something that changed history. He bypassed Director Falk. He walked straight past the administrative offices, down the hallway toward the Military Inspectorate office, the place no engineer went without permission. A guard looked up. Papers? Keller handed over his identification. And your purpose? Technical emergency, Keller said, steadying his voice. This concerns national safety. The guard hesitated, then opened the door. Inside, an inspector named Captain Hans Dietrich sat alone reviewing firing test sheets. He looked up as Keller entered. Herr Dr. Keller. Keller placed the envelope on the desk. This cannot wait. Dietrich opened it. His eyes darkened as he read. You understand the consequences of submitting this directly to the army? Yes. Dietrich looked at him long and hard. If you are wrong, your career ends. Perhaps more. Then I hope I am wrong. And if you are right, Dietrich said slowly, the entire armoured branch must halt barrel acceptance. Do you know how many panzer divisions will be delayed? Keller thought of Brenner. Of the popped chambers, of the buried reports. Yes, he said, and better delayed than dead. Dietrich closed the envelope. I will send this to Berlin. Within 48 hours, Krupp halted all L-52 barrel deliveries. The Army High Command froze inspection approvals. The Ordnance Department ordered emergency metallurgical audits. Berlin demanded full explanation from Krupp. Director Falk nearly had a stroke. Hundreds of partially finished barrels sat untouched. Assembly lines stopped. Military liaisons arrived in droves. Inspectors examined the defective barrels and found Keller's fears confirmed. Hairline internal fractures invisible to the eye, invisible to magnetic tests, but deadly when exposed to pressure. General Becker, head of Armoured Development, issued a memo. No further gun tubes will be accepted until alloy integrity is guaranteed. For the first time since 1933, a major armament pipeline was completely frozen. 500 barrels destined for tanks already scheduled for deployment were reclassified as unsafe for service. The Army estimated delays of 7 to 10 months, and while Germany accelerated repairs and reformulated the alloy, European politics continued shifting toward conflict that was still 2 years away. Those 500 silenced barrels meant hundreds of tanks would not be ready for early war operations. History would remember the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, the invasion of Poland, the Blitz across France. But almost no one remembered the note, a single sheet of paper submitted by a quiet metallurgist, which had derailed months of armoured production. A note that preserved German crews from exploding guns, and delayed tanks that might have altered early campaigns. The next morning, Keller walked through the foundry. Lines stood empty. Workers clustered in small groups, whispering. Brenner approached him. Is it true? He asked quietly. They stopped everything? Yes. Brenner nodded once. Good. Good? Keller asked, surprised. Brenner's eyes were tired but resolute. Bad steel kills men. Better machines stop now than boys die later. Keller didn't know how to respond. He looked out across the suddenly silent hall. Steam no longer hissed. Machines no longer roared. The endless hammering had ceased. 500 gun barrels sat motionless, unfinished, orphaned by the truth of their own flaws. For the first time in years, the industrial heart of the Reich held its breath. The silence felt unnatural, almost ominous, because silence in wartime production was never peace. It was only the calm before something far larger, something that would soon engulf Europe. And Keller stood in the middle of it, not knowing that the repercussions of his note would echo all the way to the battlefields of 1940, shaping outcomes no one yet imagined. April 17th, 1937, Berlin, Reich, Ministry of Armaments. The oak-panelled conference room smelled of pipe smoke and polished brass. Maps, charts, and production schedules lined the walls. The atmosphere inside felt tense, charged, as though the entire building itself understood that something was fundamentally wrong with Germany's premier armaments provider. Colonel Hermann Weiss, chief liaison between the Army High Command and Krupp, sat at the head of the table. His uniform was immaculate, his expression anything but. Across from him sat Ernst Keller, who had been summoned abruptly from Essen and escorted to Berlin by military staff without explanation. To Keller's right stood Captain Hans Dietrich, the man who had submitted Keller's report to higher command. His jaw clenched and unclenched in a steady rhythm he had clearly been, rehearsing for this meeting. Weiss tapped his pen sharply against the table. "Dr. Keller," he began, "your note has halted the production of tank cannon barrels across the entire Reich. That alone would merit scrutiny." Keller said nothing. Weiss continued, "But what concerns us more is the preliminary metallurgical audit delivered this morning." He slid a file toward Keller. Keller opened it. He froze. Inside were the results he had feared, and more, much more. The audit discovered that molybdenum content in several L-52 steel batches had been altered not by accident, but by a secondary contaminant, a trace element not native to German ore, rhenium, a rare metal, expensive, and nearly impossible to find in quantities large enough to contaminate entire steel shipments. "Where was this ore sourced?" Keller asked. Weiss answered, voice flat, "From a supplier outside Germany." The room fell silent. Everyone in the Reich's industrial circle knew that much of Germany's high-quality molybdenum still came from foreign mines, mostly across the border, in places where Berlin's influence was strong but not absolute. Captain Dietrich leaned forward. "And according to our intelligence review, 2 of those supply companies have recently had visitors." "Visitors?" Keller asked. "We have reason to believe," Weiss said, pausing as if selecting each syllable carefully, "that foreign agents have infiltrated the alloy supply chain." Keller's breath caught. Sabotage. He had suspected incompetence, corruption, political pressure, but not this. Weiss folded his hands. "Dr. Keller, whether you intended to or not, your note has uncovered a possible espionage operation conducted by a foreign power, likely the Soviet NKVD or the French intelligence service." "Why contaminate steel?" Keller asked. "Why risk detection over something so technical?" Weiss leaned back. "Because halting tank production slows rearmament, and slowing rearmament slows war." The implication hung in the air like smoke. A knock sounded at the door. A young adjutant entered, saluted, and handed Weiss a sealed envelope. Weiss read it quickly. Then his expression darkened. He passed it to Dietrich, as we suspected. Dietrich skimmed it, eyes narrowing. "So it's confirmed." Keller waited. Dietrich exhaled slowly. "Dr. Keller, 2 months ago, a shipment of molybdenum ore came through the port of Rotterdam. That shipment was routed through a Dutch intermediary company before reaching German buyers." "And?" Keller pressed. Weiss answered for him. "That intermediary firm was purchased last year by an unnamed holding group based in Paris." Keller blinked. "French intelligence?" "It appears so," Weiss said. "The Deuxième Bureau has experience interfering with foreign industrial supplies. They likely bribed or coerced the intermediary to introduce contaminated ore." "To alter hardness?" Keller asked incredulously. "They would need metallurgical understanding." Weiss nodded. "They do. The French have excellent metallurgists, and more importantly, they understand German reliance on imported alloying materials. He tapped the report. The contamination level is deliberate, precisely enough to weaken gun tubes but subtle enough to escape routine tests. Keller felt his stomach twist. How many shipments were compromised? Dietrich folded the paper. The audit estimates at least 4, possibly 5. Keller did quick mental arithmetic. 4 to 5 shipments, each shipment feeding steel for dozens of barrels, hundreds already compromised. Weiss watched Keller's reaction carefully. Now you understand why your note carries enormous political weight. Weiss rose from his seat. Gentlemen, come with me. They followed him down a corridor into the restricted wing of the ministry where armed guards flanked every door. Weiss pressed a button, and a heavy metal door clicked open. Inside was a small operations room, dimly lit, with maps, photographs, and intelligence files spread across a long central table. At the far end stood 3 men. Major Ulrich Mertens, military counterintelligence Dr. Hildebrand Krüger, ministry metallurgical expert, Inspector Jakob Vogel, Gestapo liaison. Vogel was the first to speak. So this is the engineer who uncovered our problem. Keller stiffened slightly. The Gestapo frightened everyone, including those who claimed otherwise. Mertens gestured toward the table. We're assembling an investigative unit. You will assist us, Dr. Keller, whether you want to or not. Keller stepped to the table. What are we looking at? Krüger pointed to several microscope images. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, like this video, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. These microfractures only occur when steel is quenched at incorrect temperature profiles. But here's the key. The initial heat resistance curve is off, and that only happens when the alloy is chemically compromised. So the French ore, Keller murmured. Precisely. Mertens handed him a sheet. It listed all molybdenum suppliers. 3 suppliers show irregularities, Mertens said. 2 are foreign. 1 is domestic, but connected to the others through a shipping company. We believe the sabotage runs deeper than a single ore shipment. Weiss crossed his arms. Your job, Dr. Keller, is to give us the metallurgical basis for identifying all compromised steel. Keller nodded. And what happens then? Inspector Vogel spoke, his voice unnervingly calm. Then we find the people responsible. The next morning, Keller returned to Essen under military escort. Colonel Weiss told him to resume normal duties, pretend nothing is wrong, while quietly assisting the investigators. But Keller didn't even make it through the main gate before a surprise awaited him. Standing near the entrance, speaking with a foreman, was a man Keller had never seen before. He wore a worker's coat, but something about him was wrong, too clean, too new, too perfect. His posture was too alert, and he wasn't speaking German with a Ruhr accent. His vowels were sharp, clipped. Foreign. The man noticed Keller watching him. Their eyes met for half a second, just enough time for Keller to feel a jolt of recognition. This man didn't belong here. The foreman approached Keller. Herr Doctor, good morning. That fellow over there, a new transfer from the machining division in Hall 3, says he's here to help with barrel measurements. Keller stared at the stranger. Hall 3 doesn't request help. I thought the same, the foreman said with a shrug, but his papers are in order. Keller forced a smile and walked on, but something gnawed at him. A new employee, arriving precisely at the moment a secret investigation began. Impossible to ignore. He detoured into the security office. Give me the file on the new worker in Hall 3, he said. The guard checked a drawer. No record of him arriving today, Herr Doctor. No record? None. The guard looked puzzled. Maybe the office hasn't updated logs. Keller felt dread swirl in his chest. Foreign agents rarely left paper trails. That night, Keller lay awake in his small Essen apartment. His mind raced. He had uncovered flawed steel. That had triggered an investigation. And now, someone was moving inside Krupp under a false identity. Coincidence was impossible. He sat up. Someone had noticed his note, and they were inside the factory. He dressed quietly and left the apartment. Midnight air bit at his skin as he walked toward the distant glow of the steelworks. The chimneys exhaled steam clouds that drifted across the night sky. When he reached the perimeter fence, he ducked behind a coal loader and scanned the grounds. Workers on night shift moved normally. Machinery hummed. Everything seemed routine, except for one detail. The same unfamiliar man, the new worker, was walking between the barrel storage sheds. Alone. Carrying something under his coat. Keller's pulse quickened. He followed quietly, staying in the shadows of stacked crates. The stranger stopped at Shed 5, the shed holding rejected barrels awaiting metallurgical review. He pulled out a small metal canister. Keller squinted. Not oil, not solvent, a corrosive. The man twisted the cap, and a thin chemical mist drifted into the air. He's sabotaging the evidence. Keller stepped forward instinctively and knocked over a loose bolt on the ground. It clattered loudly. The stranger whipped around. Their eyes met again, but this time the stranger understood who Keller was, and fled. The man sprinted through the darkened yard with startling speed. Keller chased him, stumbling over rails and loose stone. The saboteur dashed between furnaces, weaving around glowing vats. Workers shouted in confusion. "Stop him!" Keller yelled. "He's not authorized to be here!" The saboteur ran toward the freight platform and vaulted over a railing with practiced grace. Keller followed, lungs burning. He made the jump barely and landed hard, nearly slipping off the edge of a loading ramp. Ahead, the saboteur reached the outer fence. He pulled wire cutters from his coat. With terrifying efficiency, he snipped through a section of the perimeter. Keller lunged. He grabbed the man's coat, felt cloth tear, but the stranger twisted free and rolled through the opening. By the time Keller squeezed through the gap, the man was already disappearing into the shadows of a nearby rail yard. Keller stopped, gasping. He could go no farther. The saboteur was gone, but not entirely empty-handed, because in the torn piece of coat left in Keller's hand was a label, a tailor's mark, one used only in Paris. The next morning, Berlin moved swiftly. Colonel Weiss arrived in Essen with a team of counterintelligence officers. They examined the storage shed, collected samples of the chemical the saboteur attempted to use, and reviewed the perimeter breach. Inspector Vogel ordered an immediate lockdown. Workers were questioned, records seized. The foreman who vouched for the saboteur was interrogated for hours. He insisted he had merely been shown forged documents. Major Mertens sent the piece of coat for analysis. The Parisian tailor's mark all but confirmed the espionage theory. French intelligence had infiltrated the German steel supply chain and planted at least one operative inside Krupp itself. Keller felt a chill. His note had exposed a problem no one expected and provoked a reaction that was still unfolding. Weiss approached him. "Dr. Keller," he said, "you are now part of an active espionage case. You will continue to assist us, but under no circumstances may you discuss this with anyone." "Yes, Herr Oberst." Weiss lowered his voice. "And the man you saw last night? He escaped into the rail yard." Weiss frowned. "He won't get far, not with half the Reich looking for him." But Keller wasn't so sure. People like that didn't vanish from fear. They vanished because they were professionals, and because someone, somewhere, wanted German tanks silent. The next week unfolded under a cloud of suspicion. Krupp workers whispered about saboteurs in the foundry. Military police patrolled the grounds. A full audit of the alloy supply chain was launched. Every supplier was reviewed, every barrel rechecked, every furnace recalibrated. And meanwhile, the foreign saboteur who had infiltrated the plant had vanished without trace, or so it seemed. 3 nights later, Keller found a slip of paper beneath the door of his office. Just one sentence, written in elegant, unmistakably French handwriting. "You looked in the furnace and found fire." Keller read it 3 times. His blood turned cold. Someone was watching him, someone who knew exactly who he was. And the next move would not be subtle. April 25th, 1937, Essen. The slip of paper had not left Ernst Keller's coat pocket since he found it. "You looked in the furnace and found fire." He read it again that morning. The ink now creased from handling. The words settled into his thoughts like a slow poison. Whoever wrote it had slipped past guards, past checkpoints, past the ministry's surveillance. Meaning, the foreign agent had never really left Essen. He was still here, hiding in plain sight. Keller arrived at his office early. He locked the door behind him, something he had never done before the investigation began. Then he removed folders from his locked drawer technical reports, smelting curves, alloy source breakdowns, spreading them across the desk like battlefield maps. He wasn't a spy. He was a metallurgist. But the war unfolding inside the steelworks now required his mind more than his hands. Somewhere inside these papers was a pattern, a method, something the saboteur needed, something the foreign operation depended on. He had to find it. By mid-morning, car engines echoed through the factory courtyard, black sedans with Berlin plates, Colonel Weiss's convoy. Weiss stepped out, flanked by Major Mertens and Inspector Vogel. Workers stopped and stared. Rumours swirled like dust motes. Some whispered that the saboteur was caught, others that the Gestapo was here for mass arrests. But Keller knew better. If they had caught the saboteur, the colonel would not look so grim. Weiss approached Keller directly. "We need a word. Now." "We received information from an asset in Rotterdam," Weiss said. "The French didn't act alone." Keller's stomach tightened. "Then who?" "British intelligence," Mertens answered. "My 6. Keller blinked. "But Britain and France hate each other. Why cooperate?" Weiss gave him a hard look. "When it comes to German rearmament, our enemies cooperate very well indeed." Inspector Vogel opened a folder. Inside were photographs, documents seized from an intercepted courier near Aachen. They were coded, but one item was clear: a list of German engineers and their schedules. At the top, circled in red, ERST, Keller Technical Advisor, Armament Steel Division Keller, felt the blood drain from his face. "They're watching you," Vogel said quietly, "and they want you removed." Inside the works, a crisis was already brewing. In Hall 7, where the massive KR-52 barrels were forged, a furnace had exploded at dawn. No one was killed, but 2 workers were injured. Initial reports suggested a pressure malfunction. Keller doubted that immediately. He rushed to Hall 7, Weiss and Mertens close behind. The smell of scorched brick and burnt oil filled the air. The furnace door had blown outward, scattering shards like shrapnel. Foreman paced anxiously. Keller knelt near the damaged machinery. Something was wrong. Very wrong. He dusted ash from a metal component, a heat sensor. The wire inside had been clipped and crudely reattached with a soft solder that would melt under high temperature. A deliberate failure. "Weiss," Keller said. "This wasn't an accident. Someone disabled the safety control." Weiss cursed under his breath. Vogel turned to security officers. "Seal every exit. No one leaves the factory without clearance." But even Keller knew it was too late. If the saboteur caused this, then he had the access, the tools, and the nerve to do much more. And he wasn't finished. That afternoon, Keller met with Dr. Kruger and the technical staff in the drafting room. Blueprints lay everywhere: external sleeve diagrams, breach reinforcement sketches, combustion resistance graphs. They were trying to determine how many barrels were compromised by the tainted alloy. 47, Kruger said, wiping sweat from his brow. Out of the last 120 forged. Keller felt sick. Weiss exhaled sharply. That means nearly half our tank cannons would be unreliable in combat. And the contamination, Keller added, is subtle enough to go unnoticed until live fire. Meaning, German tanks could enter battle and lose their guns in the opening minutes. Exactly the goal of foreign intelligence. Mertens stepped forward. "We have to assume they intend more sabotage. We must find this man." But Keller wasn't convinced they were dealing with just one person. He pulled out a list of alloy deliveries, dates, weights, origins. One detail stood out immediately. A shipment recorded under a fake code, delivered at night, no listed driver, no inspection. It had occurred 1 month before the first barrel failure. Keller tapped the entry. This shipment wasn't merely contaminated, it wasn't even German. This may have been how the saboteur entered the facility. Weiss stiffened. You're saying he hid inside the delivery? Keller nodded. Or used it to smuggle equipment? Vogel clenched his jaw. Then he had help inside. Someone forged these logs. Someone with authority. A traitor. Inside, Krupp. That evening, Keller descended into the lower foundry levels, an underground maze where older furnaces and storage rooms still sat unused. Only a handful of workers went there anymore. He wasn't alone. Footsteps echoed ahead. Keller followed cautiously, staying behind pillars, listening. A door creaked open. Voices murmured inside an old maintenance room. He strained to hear. Tonight. Final stage. He leaves at dawn. Another voice sharper, foreign responded. Too much attention. Must accelerate. Keller's pulse quickened. He peered through the cracked door. Two figures. One wore a worker's coat, the same perfect, too-clean coat he had seen days earlier. The other, a German shift supervisor. The traitor, Keller, leaned closer, hardly breathing. Destroy the testing rig. Discredit their audit. Without it, they cannot trace the shipments. The saboteur handed the traitor a metal device, small, cylindrical, wind-up timed. An explosive? A sabotaging tool? The traitor pocketed it. Keller stepped back and struck a loose rivet on the floor. It rolled loudly across the stone. Inside, the voices stopped. The door burst open. The saboteur lunged, grabbing Keller by the collar and slamming him against the wall. Keller gasped. The saboteur's eyes were cold, without anger, just intention, the stare of a professional. You should not have looked for fire, the man whispered. He drew a blade. But suddenly, a shout. Guards! Vogel's voice. Halt! The saboteur released Keller and sprinted into the corridor. The shift supervisor bolted in the opposite direction. Chaos erupted. Keller, bruised but alive, stumbled after Vogel and Weiss as they chased the saboteur upward through the foundry stairwells. Alarms blared as workers fled out of the lower levels, but the saboteur was fast, inhumanly fast, bounding up steps 3 at a time. He reached the furnace gallery, weaving between glowing crucibles. Sparks rained over him, casting his figure in orange flashes. Vogel fired a warning shot. The saboteur didn't hesitate. He grabbed a hanging chain, swung across a gap between platforms, rolled onto a steel catwalk, and vanished into steam. Then, a blast. The test rig chamber. The traitor. Mertens shouted into his radio. Testing Hall 2 has been compromised. Emergency crews now. The saboteur had gained what he needed. Chaos, confusion, multiple points of failure. He was heading for the perimeter. Keller forced himself onward. They reached the storage yard. The saboteur sprinted toward the same improvised breach in the fence he had used before, but this time a row of soldiers blocked it, rifles raised. He skidded to a halt. For a moment, Keller thought they finally had him cornered, but the saboteur moved like a machine. He pivoted, sprinted toward a parked truck, vaulted onto the hood, grabbed a suspended cargo rope, and swung upward onto the scaffolding. Guards shouted. Shots cracked. The saboteur leapt from the scaffolding to the moving overhead crane hook, sliding along the chain to the far side of the yard, impossibly fluid, impossibly precise. Then he dropped behind a storage building. By the time they reached it, he was gone. A ghost. The traitor was not so lucky. He had been tackled by guards after triggering the device prematurely. His arm was broken, his face bloodied, but Vogel wasted no time. Inside a makeshift interrogation room, Vogel questioned him relentlessly. Keller waited outside with Weiss and Mertens. He didn't want to hear the screams, but he had no illusions. Vogel would squeeze out the truth. After nearly an hour, the door opened. Vogel emerged, expression like carved granite. Of what? Weiss demanded. The saboteur was inserted through the Rotterdam supply chain months ago. Documents were forged by the traitor here. His mission had 3 objectives. He held up 3 fingers. 1. Contaminate alloy shipments. 2. Destroy or corrupt test equipment. 3. Eliminate key personnel specifically, Dr. Keller. Keller felt a cold weight settle in his chest. He knows you exposed everything, Vogel said. To him, you are the most important target. Mertens stepped forward. Where is he now? Vogel shook his head. He refused to say. But I believe the saboteur intends to leave tonight. He attempted to steal a uniform. He plans to blend in with the midnight shift. Weiss exhaled sharply. Then we catch him before he disappears into the city. And how? Mertens asked. The factory holds 8,000 workers. Vogel smiled darkly. We make him come to us. 3 hours later, the Steelworks operated under an unusual pretext. Every shift worker was ordered to assemble in the main yard for an emergency safety inspection. Thousands gathered under floodlights, confused but compliant. A grid of soldiers surrounded the area. Officers checked badges, names, faces. But the saboteur, Vogel insisted, would never submit to inspection. He would seek shadows, looking for one gap, one weak point, which meant they had to force him into motion. And Keller was the bait. He walked across the yard, intentionally visible, moving toward a small office near the tool depot, a place isolated enough to tempt an assassin. Inside the office, he closed the door and waited. His hands trembled. He wasn't trained for this. Minutes passed. Then a faint sound, air moving. The slightest shift of shadow behind the file cabinet. Keller froze. Then the saboteur stepped out silently. No coat now, he wore a worker's uniform, cap pulled low. But the eyes were unmistakable. You should have left the steel to others, he said softly. Curiosity killed you. He drew a tool-sharpened blade. Keller stumbled back against the desk. The saboteur approached methodically. Quick, quiet, like an accident. He took another step, closing the distance, and a gun clicked. Drop it, Vogel snarled from behind the doorway. The saboteur spun. Vogel fired. The bullet hit the saboteur's shoulder, but he didn't fall. Instead, he launched himself sideways, smashing through the glass window in a hail of shards. Keller rushed to the window. The saboteur rolled across the gravel and sprinted toward the machinery yard. Guards shouted. Floodlights flashed. The final chase had begun. The saboteur reached the rail-switching yard. A freight train was idling, preparing for departure. Its rear doors were open. He was going to escape. But for the first time, he miscalculated. As he climbed the ladder, a figure stepped in front of him. Colonel Weiss, revolver raised. End of the line. The saboteur stared, chest heaving, then glanced behind him, soldiers with rifles approaching from all sides. He hesitated. Then he reached for something in his belt, a small, silver object, a cyanide capsule. Weiss fired. The saboteur collapsed, the capsule clattering harmlessly onto the rails. Soldiers rushed in, securing the area. Keller arrived moments later, breathless. He stared down at the man who had stalked him, who had tried to upend an entire industry. The saboteur lay still. Finally, the shadow was gone. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.